Hey guys, welcome to my studio. When you're just starting out painting in acrylics, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all of the art supply possibilities. There are just so many colors, so many brushes, and so many choices. In this video, I have my top list of essential beginning acrylic painting supplies that I am going to share with you. So let's get started. Okay, let's start out talking about paints and specifically paint brands. When you walk into the art supply store, it can be very overwhelming to see so many brands, so many levels, so many types of paint to choose from. So I'm gonna break it down really simply for you. There are craft acrylic paints, and then there are student and professional artist level acrylic paints. I would recommend, even as a beginning acrylic painter, that you stay away from craft paints and you focus on the student level or the professional level acrylic paints. The reason I say that is that craft acrylic paints are not nearly as heavily pigmented. So when they dry, they become kind of pale, less vibrant, and kind of chalky looking. And that is just not going to be very satisfying in your paintings. Same thing goes for student level and professional level. The student level is cheaper. They want to make them accessible to students. And because of that, there is less pigmentation in student acrylics than there is in the really expensive brands. There is a reason that Golden and Liquitex are some of the most expensive acrylic brands. It's because they put so much pigment into them. They stay vibrant, they stay beautiful after they dry. Now, I would not say that you should avoid student level acrylics. They're still going to give you pretty good bang for your buck. And as a beginner, you might feel like it is just too expensive to invest in those professional end things. So that is totally fine. You can buy your colors in the students if that is what you can afford and that's what feels the most comfortable and approachable for you. Okay, now let's talk about what colors you should be buying. Keeping it very simple is sometimes a way of fighting overwhelm. And if you have every color imaginable, you might not know where to start when you get down to painting. So these are the basics that I recommend. Get some very, very basic kind of primary and then secondary colors. So a white, a nice, beautiful golden yellow, a pretty primary red, a nice primary ultramarine blue, and then a darker green. These are the core of my palette because they are the most pure. If you get a red, but it's kind of like more of a pastel red or a red that has already a lot of white mixed into the tube, you're not going to be able to ever get back to a nice dark red. Same thing for green. If you maybe buy kind of a turquoisey color, and then this is like the only color that you have that would be your green color, you're never going to be able to get a deep dark green because this turquoise already has a bunch of white mixed into it to make this pre-mixed color. I don't have anything against pre-mixed colors, but I would recommend starting with the basics, and then when you find, well, maybe your red and your blue, they don't make the best shade of purple, or at least the kind of purple that you might want to see in your paintings, go out and buy a tube of purple. That's totally fine, and I would encourage you to do that once you have gotten your feet wet and you've tried mixing your colors together and seeing what you can make out of just a few. All right, now that you have your paints, what should you use as a palette? You can use something as simple as a paper plate. You can use some sort of metal tray, either a baking tray or a painting tray, with kitchen wax paper laid inside to put your paints on. But my all-time favorite painting palette is a disposable paper palette. It comes as a pad and it just has a bunch of glossy sheets in it. And once you are done mixing your paints, you can just rip the page off and be ready to start a new painting session nice and fresh. As someone who has spent hours of my life scraping dried up paint off of those little plastic paint palettes, I cannot recommend this paper palette enough. Next, let's talk about paintbrushes. I am here to tell you, you do not need to spend a fortune on a fancy artist paintbrush to make beautiful paintings. Some of my very favorite paintbrushes have been around for years. I've had them for years. They're student level. maybe they cost between $5 and $10 each when I first bought them. The two brushes that I would recommend for beginners are a flat brush and a round brush. A flat brush can fill in background areas really easily. It can do these broad, nice brush strokes. It can also make some interesting sort of blocky brush stroke shapes that you might enjoy in your painting. I love round brushes for their versatility because they have a tip, so you can do little details with them like this, but also depending on how hard you press down, you can really fan out those bristles and do wider brush strokes with them. These are both synthetic acrylic paintbrushes, and I would recommend them because they're very soft and pliable and give you a lot of control over your brush strokes. As you become more proficient in your painting, you might want something more stiff, more scraggly, something with more texture, but to begin, synthetic is a great choice. One last note about brushes is that you want to scale the size of your brushes to the size of the paper or the canvas that you're working on. Most beginners err on the side of using too small brushes, and it can be very frustrating trying to do the strokes that you imagine in your mind, trying to fill in all that empty space and just fighting with your tools because they're so tiny. So don't be afraid to buy a size that is a little bit bigger than you might think you need. You'll probably be really happy that you did. Next, what is a good beginner surface to paint on? Now, the answer to that question is going to depend on what you want to do with the painting when you are done with it. Do you want it to be a canvas you can hang on the wall? There are some really great options for canvases. If you want it to be a flat piece of paper that maybe you could pop into a standard size frame, well, then maybe you want to be looking at paper options. Some of my very favorite options, though, that I recommend all the time are canvas boards, thick gallery wrapped type canvases, and then mixed media paper. Canvas boards are really nice for experimenting on because they don't take up very much space in storage. So if you like the texture of canvas and you might want to try a canvas surface, but you're worried about maybe where you're going to put all of your paintings that you are creating, maybe you don't have a spot to hang them, canvas boards are a great option. If you want a more traditional canvas, I love the thick edge of gallery wrapped canvases. This is a painting that I made on my favorite style of gallery wrapped canvas. And you can paint the sides and hang it straight on the wall without having to even put on a frame. So I really like the ease of that option. And then also for paper, this is my very favorite paper for painting acrylic paintings on. It's Strathmore's mixed media paper. This is a really nice heavyweight paper. It holds up well to the wet and the heaviness of acrylics, but it also has a smooth surface. So if you enjoy painting on paper or painting on, a smooth surface that's not textured like the canvas is, this pad is a great option. Okay, let's move on to sketching tools. You might feel more comfortable sketching out your idea on the paper or canvas before you begin to paint, or even once you've got your background color in there, you might want to sketch on top of it to kind of figure out the shape of what you're going to be working on for the foreground. Here are some basic sketching tools to try. You can use a basic drawing pencil for sure. The one thing that I get frustrated about with graphite pencils is that when I end up painting on them, sometimes they smudge and they make my paint colors kind of muddy. You can see the color or the graphite spreads around. So I'm not a huge fan of them. I love using colored pencils to sketch on paintings because they have a wax base and they stay put, they don't rub around as much. So you can have a plain background or you can have an already painted background, and then you can kind of, sketch in your little tree or whatever it is you want. And the color kind of stays put a little bit better. And you can also have a bunch of different colors to contrast with your background. So maybe you're on something light, you want to use a dark one. Maybe you're painting on a dark background. Maybe you can use a white colored pencil, and that would be really helpful to help you be able to see your lines. The third option that is my current favorite for sketching is wax pastels. These are Neocolors wax pastels. They definitely are a little bit more on the pricey side, but if you even just buy a small pack for $10 to $15, they can be really fun because you draw them on and then you can use water to erase them off or to blend them around like paint. So I really love these because they're very flexible, they're very forgiving. If I make a mistake, I just wipe it off with a little bit of wet paper towel or my finger and some water, and then I keep going. So this is also a great option if you want to spend just a little bit more and have a really flexible art material. The final two supplies you will definitely need for acrylics are water and paper towels. Having a larger container for your water, like a big glass jar or a takeout container like this one is really helpful because then you can paint for longer and keep rinsing and not worrying about changing your water as often. Also, if you have ever painted with watercolors, you'll be familiar with the idea that you should have two containers, one for cool colors that you're rinsing out of your brush and one for warm colors. I don't worry about that with acrylics. It doesn't really start affecting my paint color at all unless I have really, really dirty water. So I generally change my water like once or twice in a painting session, and that's only if I'm rinsing a ton of water out of my brush. Paper towels, of course, are really nice for when you come out of the water and you want to dry off your brush. I like to have one kind of tucked underneath my water container like this. So I come out, I dry, and then my brush may be just perfect for going back on my color palette, or it might feel too soppy for what I want to do. So then I'll have another one to the side and I squeeze out any extra paint and water out of that brush. So now it's just damp, but not drippy at all. That's it for my list of essential supplies if you are just starting out as an acrylic painter. But I do have two bonus tools that make my life a lot easier, and I thought I would share them with you too. Okay, the first one is a palette knife. And the way that I like to use them is not for mixing every single color I use in my paintings. It's mostly for making a large amount of a single mixed color. So here's how I do it. I get, say, my mixture of colors and I bring them over. And then you use it basically as like a stirring tool to mix together a whole bunch of paint really nice and evenly. Generally, I will do this with my paintbrush if I'm mixing a small amount of paint like this. I use the palette knife if I'm painting a background of my piece, or I have a really large element and I want it all to be a really specific, evenly mixed color. I mix it with my palette knife. This helps because if you mix a large amount of a color with a paintbrush, you can often get bits of the colors that you used in that mixture stuck in between the bristles. So then when you go to paint it on the painting, those colors start coming out and it can be frustrating. So that's why I like using a palette knife for a really specific color that I might want to have. My second tool is a good old hairdryer. I use my studio hairdryer all the time in my paintings. Often I'll have a thin layer of paint that I just want to be dry so I can get on to the next layer. And because acrylics dry pretty speedily, I just hit it with the blow dryer and that can just move my painting process along that much quicker. I hope you found this list helpful for getting started in your acrylic paintings. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more tips and tutorials about acrylic paints. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!